Welcome back to the channel, folks, and to one of two videos that I've made about my recent trip to the UK Nationals. I've made two videos because I want to talk about the event and also then go through my list and the games. And to make that one video, it would probably be quite long for a video of that nature. This video is going to go through my list and go through the games. If you want to see the video about the event itself, including the painting competition, then there is a link in the description below. If you're familiar with the channel, you know I'm probably not the most competitive player that you'll meet, and I didn't take a list that was built around any sort of competitive meta or whatever the hell they call it. I don't even know the terms that well, folks, but I somehow managed to end up coming second, and hopefully we can find out why when we go through the games. Now I'm going to go through my list next, and then at the end of the review of the games I'll sort of tot up my losses over the whole tournament and maybe have a look at how many platoons I lost, what they were, and what I managed to destroy. And also, you know, was it a game where I was attacking, was there somebody defending, like versus tanks versus infantry and such likes, to maybe give you an appraisal of the list that I've used. So here is the list, folks. You can see I've got two formations in there plus a little bit of support. We've got Berlin Panzer IVs. These are the battle group Panzer IVs, so they are careful, veteran but reluctant, and they don't have the Third Reich rule, so they are reluctant. They will pass last stands on a 5, and the Panzer IVs though still have protected ammo, so a 4 up to remix, not too bad. Now you notice that they have got Wirbelwinds as part of the formation and a full platoon of 4. That was an important part of that formation for me, not only to give it 4 platoons, but to give it a real meaty anti-infantry, anti-gun type element. Now the Panzer IVs themselves, well, they are reluctant, but if they can get into an assault against infantry and they're hitting on a 3 up, there's a good chance they can do a lot of damage. If they have to break off, well, hopefully it's to come back in on another turn. If the terrain behind me when I'm breaking off is okay, then there's no great risk other than receiving fire the following turn. So the Panzer IVs, to my mind, were going to be important for assaulting as well as duking it out with medium tanks and gun lines. The Brigade Panzer Grenadiers, well, these guys are aggressive, reluctant, trained. They do have the Third Reich, so that's a 4 up last stand, which is quite important because they're aggressive, they're going to get hit a lot. There's 2 platoons of infantry in there. They've all got MG bases and 2 Panzerfaust each. The HQ's also got a single Panzerfaust, so there's a lot of potential anti-tank assaults in there. And just like with the Panzer IVs, they might be reluctant, but if they get their retaliation in first, they may not have to worry about any counter-attack rolls. I've got a minimum sized drilling platoon, that's the triple flak. I don't particularly like the triple flak. I know a lot of people fill their units up with them and there's hundreds and hundreds of them. You know, that might be okay for keeping your formation on the table and making you feel as though you're not going to lose, but it's not going to help you win, I don't think, having hundreds of them unless you come up against the perfect opponent. So I've got 3 because I have to take 3. Being left with 2 points for support, well, that was going to be a scout platoon and the SS because, well, I've only got 2 points left. A careful scout platoon would be better, but the SS will do me fine. And you'll notice that there is no artillery on the list at all, folks. Wesps are normally in every one of my German tank lists. You really can't do without it, it seems, but to get these in I would have to weaken my Panzer IV formation, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted platoons of 4 because they were reluctant, so I decided to do without them. And experience from using this in a couple of practice games shown me that they are actually a very effective unit against gun lines and in many cases dug in infantry. The only infantry that I would be worried about would be Berlin type infantry, where they've got like 2 Panzerfausts and you cannot just shoot off the Piats or the bazookas or the Shreks and such likes. So I'm not concerned about the lack of artillery. It's proven to be a decent list against tanks. It's got a lot of dice it can chuck out. It's got the Panzer IV 70s for the heavier stuff, the harder to hit Panzer IVs who can be mobile. The infantry can also be very mobile in their half-tracks, and that's how I want to use them. And then if I come up against gun lines, as I will no doubt when I'm fighting infantry, then you've got the hard to hit Werble ones, a few drillings, the half-tracks potentially as well, but the Panzer IVs, the Panzer IV 70s, as soon as I see an anti-tank gun platoon, it's probably going to get blasted off the table unless it makes some really good saving throws. When I was setting up the tables on the Friday night and meeting a few of the players, they were all saying, oh, here's a guy with the Panzer IVs. You must be really brave bringing Panzer IVs. But I think they're a great tank. Careful ones. Brigade ones are terrible. And maybe people are thinking about Panzer IVs in terms of brigade Panzer IVs. I think that they're a great tank if you can keep them concealed, if you can manoeuvre them properly and support them properly. Infantry running around them to keep them safe. In the knife fight situations, the Panzer IV 70s providing long range support, I think they can be quite effective. Let's see how they get on in the games. The first game was against Ian, using Soviets, one of the very few players who brought Soviet lists. And when I first saw Ian's list, I thought to myself, he's either going to be very clever, or he's maybe an inexperienced player, because he had a very mobile and attacking list with very defensive command cards. By that I mean he's got tanks, mobile armoured infantry, but then a command card that gives him extra minefields, and one that removes, or rather moves, ranged in markers, which is typically a defensive measure to move a marker away from an objective. I'd been thinking about the stance for this game as the first matchup was announced before the event, and I didn't know whether my opponent was going to attack or defend. As it turned out, Ian, who's a great guy, had only just started playing in the game, and that is perhaps why his list was a little confused. So we ended up just doing attack against each other. But let's have a little more of a look at his list. So this is one of the sort of classic Soviet lists, the Armoured Recce Company, and this is a Bagration one, not the Berlin one. You can see it's got everything you'd expect to see there, the units themselves. It's got 76mm anti-tank guns, mortars, armoured cars, integral T-34 76s, and then in support it's got a really tough platoon of 6 T-34 85s that could dish out a lot of pain. And then also 3 decoy Panthers that are going to be hard to kill and could also dish out a bit of pain. Now, I'm not familiar with cards, I don't use them myself, so that old minefield had me scratching my head, what the hell's that all about? Well, basically it allows him to place in no man's land or his own deployment zone 5 markers, but it goes like this minefield markers. He puts one down, I put one down, he puts one down, I put one down, and he puts one down. Once anybody goes into those minefields, they get triggered. However, they only become minefields on, I can't remember if it's a 1, 2 or 3 or 4, 5 or 6, but it's a 50% chance that they become minefields or they just get removed. Now, in a defensive situation, if you've got 4 minefields and you add that to it, that's quite nasty. An attacking situation, I was struggling to see how it would be any good, but in Ian's next game, he made a trap with these for his opponent. He put a minefield on a road that led the most direct route towards the objective he had to capture, and then put his armour cars on that road. The opponent thought he can't get up that road and didn't protect his objective very well, and then Ian charged up that road, used his lucky card to make sure that that minefield got removed and just strode straight onto the objective. You know, so it was quite clever the way that he used it. In this game, as you'll see though, there wasn't much option for that, particularly when he was up against the list as I brought. So we were both going to attack in this mission, so it is a bit of a Mexican standoff in these new attack type missions. So let's go over, have a look at the game. Here's a first look at the table. This is a table set up by Rob from Valley Gaming. Hopefully you follow his channel. If you don't, check it out and subscribe. One point of note is the hill that's just about in shot there on the right hand side is impassable to vehicles. That's certainly how we played it. Infantry and gun teams, it would be a cross check. Now you notice there are some real minefields on the table there. You can see two clearly in my deployment zone, but I can't talk about that, folks, because it's the new missions. On the right, I set myself up to take on anti-tank guns and the tanks over that side of the table, but my infantry definitely, and potentially other elements, were going to head off to the right around the woods and mount a flank attack. You can see in the town there in the centre I've got Panzer IV 70s initially set up to cover the right flank, but they could turn over towards the left in that position, and there's some more Panzer IVs in there who could do the same depending on where the weight of anti-tank fire was needed. And on the left I've got another Panzer IV 70 platoon. They can put fire down that side, and then my infantry on that side too. So I've got infantry on both flanks. This side is a potential infiltration point for the Soviets. If they came down the flank, those factories are good blockers for line of sight. So I've also got my drillings and my scouts over there to potentially shoot up any infantry that might come down that way, but I could also move on from that point. Now to Ian's deployment, on his right you can see he has a platoon of infantry with a real minefield defending an objective. He's got his mortars there beside the wood, then he's got his decoy panthers, T-34 76s, so that's a good combination, and then a big chunky armoured car platoon. His centre is quite empty. There's lots of craters there to potentially interfere with movement, and you can see lots of fake minefields. These are the fakers out across the centre of the table. And then on his left you can see a platoon of infantry protected once again by a minefield sitting on an objective, and he's got his big chunky 85mm T-34s over there with the 76mm anti-tank gun, so a good solid amount of fire could come out of that area, or a good defence mounted. Ian won the roll off for first turn. Now we're both pretty much in range and line of sight of each other already in this game, and it's a flat table with not a lot of tall terrain between us, so it was basically a bit of a Mexican standoff to begin with. The only real movement from Ian was to push his armoured cars up to try and get them into a position to perhaps use their anti-tank rifles. But the first ton of shooting really went to myself because the armoured cars took a bit of a pasting. One T-34 76 also got knocked out. On the other side of the table, nothing much was happening. I wasn't getting much luck against those T-34 85s, at least not yet. The only real movement on my part was an attack up my right flank, as you can see there. Initially just the infantry, but I put the Wehrabel ones in to support them. Lots of cross here orders needed and so on to get through that terrain, but I wanted to get up on that flank with my infantry in cover, put pressure on those anti-tank guns, and after that onto the objective. Ian kept pushing on with his armoured cars to try and get something out of them before they bit the dust. They could have gone around the back of the factories and maybe caused a bit more bother that way, but he just charged them up the middle there, and so it didn't take me too long to knock them out. Otherwise we were really getting into a bit of a long range tank duel with the T-34s and the decoy panthers up against my Panzer IV 70s and Panzer IVs. Throughout the tank duel I was getting most of the hits, which isn't surprising because my Panzer IVs are careful, and the Panzer IV 70s were sitting further back. They were certainly in range of the Panthers, and that's kind of who they engaged with. And the Panthers did start to fall, as did the T-34s, but it took quite a bit of time. There was some good saving throws made. Over on the right, where I'm doing the flank attack, I'm starting to make progress against the T-34 85s, as you can see there. The only casualty I think so far is going to be a Wehrabel that died early actually in the round, and you can see my infantry have debussed, ready to move up with their own half tracks and the Wehrabel to support them against the gun line. And before too long on the other side of the table it was just a couple of T-34 76s holding the line there. As things were developing more over on the right, Ian got his infantry up onto that hill, and we decided it was bulletproof cover because it's so rocky, and the T-34s decided to try and get out of that sort of valley of death that they were in with the Panzer IV 70s and the Panzer IVs, and they were going to try and come around and hit my Panzer IVs in the flank. But Ian's anxious to protect the objective a bit, but also to protect those anti-tank guns with his infantry. Over on my left, I now got an opportunity to push on and try and take an objective. The Panzer IV 70s are moving up. You can see Panzer IVs moving up too, and the infantry leading the way in their half tracks. On the right, the T-34 85s have pretty much had it now. and I am ready to have a go at the objective via the gun line and infantry. But I've decided I'm going to do a little bit of preparation work. It's pushing time a little bit, but if I go running out into all that defensive fire from submachine guns, it could be very punishing, so I'm going to develop another bit of a flank movement there. On the left, I kept pushing up, and that put me in range of the 50 cals from the white half-tracks, so they were a bit dangerous, so I had to get rid of them first, and eventually the Panzer IVs came up to support the infantry to put in some assaults, but the game was won over on the right flank, as I'll explain. I concentrated my fire on the infantry. As they were uphill, I could stack my vehicles a little bit and just fire over, and I knew those infantry were what was really holding that objective, so I wanted to attract them in preparation for assaults. But I was quickly able to get the infantry attrited right down just to a couple of bases, and to get the anti-tank guns pretty much down to, as you can see, one base there, ready for me to move in for the kill. Ian moved his white scout cars up with a 50 cals, and he actually managed to bail out 3 of my half-tracks, which is pretty good going. But I was able to get my assault in, killed the last remaining base of infantry, and that obviously meant that the half-tracks, or the white scout cars, sorry, ran away anyway, and that made it an 8-1 win, because there was nothing over there that could really contest the objective. It's an enjoyable game. It's a good start. Ian's not an experienced player, and I think, you know, maybe it wasn't a completely tournament ready list, but I think he also knows that now, and it's a great player to have a game against, really. Second game was against Jack. He's using a Berlin formation here, and you can see it's a Berlin battle group and Clausewitz stuff mainly in support. The Berlin battle group, it's not one of these big massive ones with hundreds and hundreds of Volkssturm and, you know, the local militia and such like. It's fairly sensible in that it's got a fearless platoon, fearless aggressive, and then a confident careful platoon. You can see there's also some Pak 40s as part of the formation, and then there's some support in the form of triple flak, scout platoon, stews. They were quite popular during the event, it seems. And you can see as well there, folks, an elephant, the Berlin elephant. It made an appearance. Only time in the whole tournament that we saw a Berlin elephant. Now Jack won the whole event with this list, folks, so if you're one of these people who like to look at lists and think, can I play that too, be sure to check this out. Now I have to say I don't have a lot of pictures of this game, so I'm not going to really be able to talk you through it. It was quite a competitive game, and that's not really the kind of game that I enjoy myself, but as a result most of the time we were just focused on what was happening on the tabletop. But a quick word about the table and the way it was set up, and this was similar to the next game that I had. You'll see the roads there are at 90 degrees, right in the middle of the table on the short and the long axis, and then lined with hedges and tree lines. Now these roads are basically framing deployment zones, so if I'm attacking up the table, for instance, I'm having to go over 2 hedges. Likewise, if I'm attacking from the left hand side, having to go over 2 hedges, up against infantry armed with Panzerfaust, having to make cross checks and so on. It gives the defender a real advantage. Not saying that had an influence on this game, but it does have an influence on decision making for both sides. So when you're laying the tables out, try and keep those angles. That's what I usually do, and therefore they don't have too much of an influence on the game. Anyway, this was a very bloody fight. Lots of platoons getting destroyed, and after I had managed to get 3 of Jack's platoons, well, I was quite happy there to take the 6-3 loss. Third game of the day, and the third game, by the way, folks, that's like the sort of, you know, breaking point for a lot of people on day one on a tournament. It's been a long day up to this point. That was against Stuart. Now Stuart, you may know from social media as 3 Colours Painted. He brought a lovely Berlin themed army. You probably see a picture of that in the section on the painting competition, but you can also check him out definitely on Instagram. That's 3 Colours Painted. Now Stuart's list is the one list that I was not at all confident of taking on. My list is designed to deal with tanks, and it can deal with different kind of infantry, but this list was just absolutely full of Panzerfaust and Panzerschrecks, and I just don't have enough assets, and I will readily admit that the lack of artillery in this game, lack of smoke barrage for instance, was a definite disadvantage for me. There's a lot of stuff in that list, so I won't take time to read it through all. It just hit pause and you can check through it just now. Now, the mission, well, first of all, the matchup, the stances. I should have said in game 2, by the way, I took manoeuvre. In this game I also took manoeuvre because I wanted to avoid minefields if possible, though in this mission it was good a rear guard, it had minefields anyway. Rear guard is a mission that's got lots of more difficult challenges for both players, but for me the main challenges in this game were actually terrain. There's nothing that looks really horrible in the way of terrain in this game, but it was this whole quadrant base roads and then heavy hedges with the addition of woods in every single corner, big woods. Now the woods are no good to me, I don't have artillery or anti-tank guns to place in them, so my deployment zone was really quite restricted into the middle. Over on the left, you can't see it, are minefields, so I am pointing towards the objective, which is in the top quadrant that you can see there. You can see Stuart's got his 88 platoon protecting the objective, he's got his stews in the wood, he's got Volkssturm in front of the 88s, Volkssturm HMGs beside them, and then in the centre, able to go either way to support, he's got his large Berlin Fallschirmjäger unit. On my left you can see he has got his large artillery unit, the Panzer 470s. Remember, these are careful Panzer 470s, not like my aggressive ones. And he's got more Volkssturm behind the minefields, and then protecting the objective itself he's got that terrible SS tank hunter platoon with 3 Panzerschreck bases and then 4 Panzerfaust bases. Oh my goodness. So in turn 1 I was within easy reach of the 88s with my whole army, so I basically moved what I had to move and then destroyed the 88 platoon in turn 1. Edged up infantry a little bit because I'm not really sure how to get over these hedges in a safe way. A lot of the time if I get over the hedges I'll be into more cross checks or I'll be into the open, so kill what I can kill to clear the way a little bit. Now over the next couple of turns, to replace the 88s, the SS Pak 40 is deployed, and you can see what's left here after some bombardments from the 10.5s. Quite a few losses on my side. No Pak 40s left because, as I've said before, my list really is a gun killing list. So I'm clearing away a little bit, but there's still the stews in the wood, the artillery coming over the top, and the Panzer 470s a little bit out of shot there just now. They're also a real threat to me that I'll need to turn to next. And of course Stuart is having to withdraw platoons, so he's starting over on the left. We've got a Volkssturm platoon behind minefields not doing anything. He's got a heavy machine gun platoon in the middle in those buildings that's getting shot up but not doing anything. He's got mortars at the back who've got no really juicy targets, keeping his core units in place on the table. Our Panzer 470 platoon started going head to head, and this was crazy folks, it really was. We were clobbering each other constantly. At one turn for instance I had 3 hits on one platoon and every single one of them saved, needing 5s or 6s, and Stuart was doing the same with the hits I was putting in against him. I have suffered 1 bail, and in the end he only suffered 1 knocked out tank. That could have decided things if it had have developed better in my favour and developed sooner, but it was taking a long time for me to kill those Panzer 470s and also the stews over in the wood. I just wanted to get rid of them to feel confident of moving out into a position where I could consider launching an assault into a platoon, 2 Panzerfausts and 2 Panzerschrecks. And as the fighting was very much over on my right hand side, Stuart lifted his Fallschirmjäger with all those Schrecks and Fausts, and with a smoke bombardment to protect them, moved them over to sit on that objective. And with the Fallschirmjäger in place, Stuart withdrew the Volkssturm that were in front of them. But you know, it was taking me a long time to finish off the stews, for instance, and I couldn't quite get anything against the Panzer 470s, so time was against me here. My infantry were getting shot up by the artillery and by stews and everything that could point at them. Stuart really focused on them, and I had no real place to infiltrate them. That's my favourite tactic with them in the half tracks, is getting them up around the back of terrain and such likes and into threatening positions, so they kind of just sat there and got a bit of a kicking. I no doubt could have done more with them though. Now you can see here I've cleared away a bit, so getting around all those hedges and worrying about breaking off isn't such a big problem anymore, but it'd taken too long to get to this point. You know, it's limited by turns, this mission. If it was purely by time, then it'd be a completely different kind of mission, but I would have been able to then get in and figure out how the hell I'm going to assault all those Fallschirmjäger with their anti-tank weapons. So I got a 6-3 loss, and to be honest folks, I was quite happy with that. At the end of day one, I've gone there with no expectations. Remember, I'm not a competitive player, so to get a win, champion, that's one box ticked. To get 2 losses at 3 points, that's another 2 boxes ticked. I'm on target for my modest ambitions. So it's day number 2, game number 4, and I'm up against Ian with his late US Shermans. No infantry in the list, you'll see here, just the sort of typical kind of mixture of all the different variants of Shermans that you can have in the late Sherman list. There's also a couple of cards in there. There's a spearhead card, which is quite popular to reduce the motivation of the Shermans down by a point, but then give you more points to spend elsewhere on, for instance, upgrades for hypervelocity or just more tanks. Now Ian's not gone for the hypervelocity here, but he has gone for an extra 76mm gun platoon from the D-Day book. So these are going to be like aggressive tanks. And you know, he's also downgraded his 75mm Sherman platoon to the early Sherman, so no protected ammo and only 6 points of armour on the front. Now Ian's got 2 priest batteries, and I have to tell you that priest batteries are my nemesis. Whenever I'm playing my Germans, particularly these kind of Germans, they just wipe out my infantry because they're easy to hit. My Panzer 470s fail their save straight away. My King Tigers get bailed out by them. So that was a big worry for me. But you can see the list that he's got, how it would be good against tanks and also good against any of these big massive infantry lists that you could come up against in the tournament. We both took attack as our stance, and we rolled on one of the new missions for attack versus attack. It's got objectives for both of us. We've got to take an objective to win this game. There's no sitting looking tough, you've got to get stuck in about it, and we're fighting down the length of the table. Here is my deployment. Oh, if the table looks familiar folks, yes, it's my table. I brought a table down, so I did tell Ian that I was playing at home, so to speak, but I think it didn't put me at any real advantage. Ian played the terrain very well, especially in his initial deployment. But let's have a look at mine. You can see the bulk of my army is over on the left. I've got all of my Panzer IVs, I've got my drillings, and I have 1 platoon of infantry. The Panzer 470s in the centre of the table there, they're really aiming at that hill that's right in the middle of the table, because the Yanks are going to get advantage there that I'm not going to get because of those minefields that Ian has cleverly placed on my back slope. And then on the other side there's 4 Panzer 470s and the Wirbelwinds and a platoon of infantry to attack up the flank, try and sneak past the town on the right centre. Now I could tell from Ian's deployment that he knew what he was doing. He was keeping all of his tanks out of line of sight, or at least in cover, because this is going to be one of those missions where you roll off to see who goes first, and first player is moving ready to fire. So he wasn't leaving anything sitting out to get knocked out in an early win for me. He matched me for tanks over on the left, and in the right by the town he had 2 tank platoons up against my Panzer 470s, infantry and Wirbelwinds. But you know, that was probably overmatched against me on that side. But this was going to be a pretty cutthroat game because Ian didn't have any infantry to leave back on his objectives, and I wasn't intending to leave any infantry back on the objective. I think we were going to have a proper knife fight here. So I got first turn, decided I'm not going to hang about, those priests will punish me if I just sit and act all cagey. I'm just going to charge. So I charged up the right side with everything, leaving the objectives hanging, just a scout platoon hanging about back there. And over on the left side, my veteran Panzer IVs all decided to fail their blitzes because I wanted to try and get out and pick off some of the tanks that are about to go hull down on the other side of the hill there. And for all my firing in turn 1, I only got 1 kill. It was one of those Shermans behind a hill. Over in the town, my Panzer IV 70s with 3 shots against gone to ground. Careful tanks didn't get any hits. So for Ian's first turn, everything on that side came out to play, so to speak, though the team on the hill that's going to go hull down failed a blitz to get to the top of the hill. And his main focus on this side of the table was my infantry and the half-tracks. He clearly wanted to destroy them, because you can imagine if they'd have moved up one more turn next turn, I'd been in that wood with Panzerfaust assaulting the objective right behind it. So it was probably a good idea, but I left my Panzer IVs untouched. Over by the town, I soon learned that I should have just stayed back on that side, because the Panzer IV 70s were rapidly outflanked by the Shermans in a perfect position to hit their side armour, and all they got out of all the shooting was one 75mm smoke round successfully deploying smoke against one. A real get out of jail for me, because that would have been, I think, a game-winning move. Look at the objective down the bottom of the screen if that had gone well, or as expected for Ian. And at the town, Ian's at 75mm Sherman platoon. It's just at the back of the town there. They got themselves into a position to clobber a couple of my half-tracks. Once again, he wants to stop my infantry moving forward. If I get them into those buildings, it could cause a bit of problems for the tanks trying to defend that area. So, still in the town, in my turn, 2 of the Panzer IV 70s moved to get clear shots. So that was going to be 4 dice, and I believe it or not, folks, got 4 hits on those Shermans, leaving just the jumbo still alive. And then the Wehrabelwinds, they're going to keep moving up that side of the table, keeping out a line of sight of the Shermans just behind the town though, because it'd be easy pickings for them at that range. Over by the wood, the Shermans are really starting to feel the pain now, because I've got all my Panzer IVs and the Panzer IV 70s firing into them at short range, most of them in the open, like the ones that are easy to hit, for instance the 76mm. So you can see there's a lot of destroyed tanks there, and my flak half-tracks, you can see them going to sneak up the side of that wood, potentially get around the side and go for the mortar half-tracks and the objective that's sitting there. In Ian's next turn, there were a few motivations required, and it resulted in the surviving jumbo in the town running away. It was time for some payback over by the wood, and the Panzer IVs, you know, when they're in the open, they're relatively easy to hit, and 6 points of armour on the front doesn't make them too survivable, so one of my platoons took a real beating. In the next turn, you can see by the town I've got 1 Panzer IV 70 staying put to shoot at some gone to ground Shermans. The other 2 moving over, using the buildings as cover to go at the flanks of the 76mm Shermans by the wood, and the Wehrabelwinds are happily moving off past those Shermans saying, well, who are you going to shoot? You're going to shoot Panzer IV 70s, you're going to shoot us, and I'm going after the priests. And the infantry platoon has moved into the cafe. Over by the wood, I finish off the 76mm. I'm not having much luck against the HQ platoon, and the flak half-tracks are just peeking round the corner, having some shots now at those mortar half-tracks, who are going to suddenly find they've actually got 50 cals and start shooting back. My infantry on that side weren't unpinning, I never mentioned that before, so they've been going back the way just to cover an objective, just in case, and probably keeps the platoon alive. They're going to dig in here and hopefully call it a day. And I should say, the Panzer IV 70 shooting the gone to ground Shermans on 6s, would you believe it, folks, I got 2 hits, 2 kills. So Ian's starting to run out of tanks by now. He's getting pretty close to a formation break too. So the HQ are pulling back from the tree line. They're going to have a go at my flak half-tracks, try and finish them off and destroy another platoon. And the surviving Shermans by the town are having to come over to start to cover the objective by the field. You can just see it at the corner of the field there, and the scout platoon are keeping their back safe to a degree from assaulting by providing defensive fire. And note the Wehrabelwinds are starting to have an impact on the priests, and they start actually having a bit of a battle in the next turn or so, as the surviving priests just start doing direct fire against them. So what happened next, folks? Well, I moved my Panzer IV 70s over onto the objective. I then used my Weber Winds to shoot up and effectively destroy the scout platoon. Panzer IV 70s destroyed one Sherman. My infantry were in a position to launch an assault. 4 bases went in, 5 defensive fire dice, got 4 hits, and I failed 3 of them, leaving just my HQ, but he got a hit with a Faust, so that was the end of that Sherman. Meaning that the half-tracks had to come over to sit on the objective to keep the game alive, so Ian could possibly get some rear shots at my Panzer IV 70s from the wood, but it was all looking pretty grim and it went as you might inevitably expect. So the Panzer IV 70s, they took the objective, and I only lost 1 platoon. The Panzer IVs that ran away earlier, when there was a couple destroyed, a couple bailed out. The flak half-tracks, they passed last stands. The infantry on the road beside the objective passed last stands. My transports got pulled off the table before they had to do any last stands. So I managed to nate 1. I'm not sure how, but that's what I got. Game 5, the last game. It's myself against Alexander, one of the 4 other Scottish players who were at the event. Alexander is using the same list that he played at the Scottish Nationals in May. He wants to try it out with the new victory conditions that we were trying in the UK Nationals. I played against this list in May. I attacked with Hungarian infantry and we got a draw using the current victory conditions. Under the new conditions, it would have been a win for Alexander. So this is a good test for him to see how his list plays. And he's so far has got 2 wins just like me and 22 points just like me. So this is a good decider between us. You can see his list is based around battle-weary infantry with a couple of command cards in there. Just pause the screen at any time you want to really drill into the list because there's quite a lot there. His reserves are in the form of Easy 8s. His hope for this reserve platoon is that it can arrive in the place it can do the most damage, because it can move on 4 inches and it's an Easy 8. The jumbo obviously won't get this through, but the Easy 8s can all fire at the full rate of fire without any penalty for stabilisers, so that could be really hard hitting. He has got lots of anti-tank guns too, which could be very effective against a vehicle type force such as I have. Alexander chose defend as a stance and I chose manoeuvre, once again looking to avoid minefields and such. And Bridgehead is probably the closest mission from the existing packs to the new mission that we were playing here. So the defenders are going to deploy in a smallish box, tight box, quite a close knit defence on the back edge of the table, and I'll have a sort of 8-inch deep band running up the sides and across the back with the potential for spearheads in a very narrow space up the side of the table. So Alexander's got his force on the table with his Easy 8 platoon and his scout platoons in reserve. Now, one important point here is you can see he's deployed inside the wood within 4 inches of the objective, but he's not deployed in front of the objective. So straight away I'm thinking opportunities, because if I can kill the infantry in the wood close to the objective, he's got to come out. He won't be dug in. So straight away that is going to be something I'm going to be focusing on, and the terrain on this game is going to be very useful for me, I feel. So for my deployment, you see I've kept my sort of meat choppers, shall we say, the Weber Winds and the flak half-tracks in the centre with some Panzer IVs and the Panzer IV 70s. Now the Panzer IV 70s are there as a flank guard against potential reserves arriving over in that corner, and the flak is all going to move up to take on the gun line. The Panzer IVs there can support, and I can't push too much more down the flank anyway. This is my spearhead move. The Panzer IV 70s on the hill are just going to provide cover against the arrival of reserves. I've got my Panzer IV HQ plus 1 platoon, then all my infantry, including their HQ, and I'm going to move the Panzer IVs around the back to force the priests to move, and maybe destroy some. And infantry are going to move around the back but also into that wood so I can attack the flank of the objective and also the exposed flank of those anti-tank guns. And here is the first turn. You can see the Panzer IVs, they got shots off but didn't manage to get any hits on the priests, but the priests are very exposed now. Sitting behind that hill is not going to give them any protection. The infantry are ready to debus and move into the woods. In the centre I wasn't going to be getting much hits on the anti-tank guns this turn because they were going to ground. But I deliberately put my flak half-tracks out in the open to draw fire because I'd rather they took the hit from the initial firing of the anti-tank guns rather than my Wehrbohwins, who I think are key. Neither is likely to survive any hits from the anti-tank guns, so I might as well be on the worst platoon. And you can see here, after the priests were forced to move onto the back of the hill away from the Panzer IVs, the Panzer IV 70s were able to get themselves in a position to shoot them on their exposed flank. And you can see here the flak half-tracks, they have been knocked out. The other anti-tank gun platoon on the other objective, the 57mm, they fired at the Wehrbohwins all day long, needing sixes and never got a single hit, so that was a bit unlucky. Now after those 57mm destroyed the flak half-tracks, they basically got wiped in one turn. There was so much fire coming in against them. And then Alexander popped his ambush in the same position, some guns pointing back towards the forces coming in the rear and some pointing forward, dealing with the swarms of half-tracks, some of them with infantry inside them that were coming towards them. And after some initial firing wasn't altogether too successful, they basically got wiped out as well by the same gun line that was facing the 57mm. One Panzer IV and a couple of the half-tracks fell victim to the 3-inch anti-tank guns before they were shot up themselves. Alexander got his reserves, SE Easy-8s. The one dice he didn't want to get was a 1 or a 2, because that was the far corner where I was nowhere near, so he rolled a 1. What can you do, folks? That's going to have a huge impact on the game because they're nowhere near where they need to be. If they'd got anything else, they'd have been right in amongst my attack, causing havoc. Fair enough, I might have got them back with my infantry in their face, but they would probably have dealt with my Panzer IVs. Now my infantry in the woods are still pinned, but the ones that were in the half-tracks came out, assaulted the mortars, killed them, took cover in the wood, and then you can see I'm moving my scouts up to within 4 inches of the objective because I now want to put that objective under pressure. And of course the scout platoon, the cavalry scout platoon, it arrives exactly where Alexander wanted his Easy-8s to arrive. It's a dice game, folks. It can be quite cruel and inconsiderate at times. Now I should point out that the infantry that dismounted from the half-tracks assaulted the mortars. They've taken casualties before they even dismounted. They're last standing, but they're doing it, they're managing it. It's only a 4-up. They've got a decent last stand, but they're doing it. One of the Easy-8s fell victim to my flank guard Panzer IV 70s on the way across. Having taken out the anti-tank guns, I'm now starting to whittle down those infantry. Can already see they're being pushed back away from the objective there. So Alexander's got no choice but to push the infantry up to be able to keep contesting the objective, but they're coming out of their foxholes. You can see another platoon's coming down off the hill out of its foxholes, and then another one's coming off the far objective to try and get involved in the game, potentially assaulting through those buildings. The Panzer IV 70s kept up the flank task and took out another Easy-8 behind the wood. So for the final turn it was just shooting up the infantry that were not dug in on the edge of the wood as much as possible in preparation for an assault. The rest of my force just backed away from those marauding infantry you can see coming in from the right. There's no need for me to get up close and personal and launch assaults into bazooka armed infantry. All the bazookas in the first platoon that I'm going to assault are dead, and there's only one left alive, or rather one left in range in the platoon behind. To end it, I got 2 Panzer IVs, one of them being the HQ, to get an assault in, and they killed one base of infantry they could contact, and even with the reroll they are reluctant. The battle weary infantry, they broke off, and that was a victory for me because that pushed everybody back more than 4 inches from the objective. By the end of the game I'd managed to pass a couple of last stands. I think the scouts were last standing, plus one of the infantry platoons. So that meant I only lost one platoon once again. So that was quite surprisingly another 8-1 win for me. And it was down to a large extent to the terrain being exactly as I wanted. It was favourable for me, and also to quite simply the reserves coming in the wrong place for Alexander. Now to kills and losses. Just as a final summary, I destroyed 9 tank platoons and a couple of transport platoons as well, and 6 gun platoons throughout all of the games. I didn't destroy any infantry platoons. Oh wait a minute, no, I'd got one infantry platoon to take an objective in the first game. So just one infantry platoon across the event, and a mortar platoon as well. Let's have a look at my own losses. So first of all, the scouts, they made a last stand to stay in the last game, maybe a couple of times, but no losses for the scouts. The Panzer IVs lost 2 platoons. One of them was attacking Berlin type infantry, another one head-to-head fight against US armour. The Wehrbohns, now let me think. The Wehrbohns, I lost 1 platoon of Wehrbohns against Berlin infantry that was defending it. It was direct fire, mostly from Stews, that did for them. Panzer IV 70s, I lost 2 of them, both in the one game, and that was against Berlin infantry. Drillings, I believe they were destroyed 3 times, or rode their luck. It could have easily been 4, and that was against all types, infantry and guns defending, or tanks when we were both attacking. And then my infantry, they didn't actually get destroyed at any point. No one platoon was lost, though they were badly beat up. There was a few last stands needed, but they managed to survive. The half-tracks actually got knocked out. Let me think. Definitely 1 platoon of half-tracks was destroyed, and the rest of the time the survivors had to be removed to avoid them subsequently being destroyed. So quite good survivability for the unit. A few maybe lucky last stands to get me there, but quite good survivability. They dished out a lot of damage, and where the terrain was in my favour, I was able to manoeuvre effectively and ride my luck a little bit perhaps in a couple of moments. But that's what you have to do. To win games, you have to stick your neck out and ride luck a little bit, because you can see where I just stood there and went for 3 points. Yeah, I'm going to get 3 points, but I'm not going to get the win. You get 3 points for destroying 3 enemy platoons. You get 6 points for losing 3 of your own platoons and taking an objective, So it's hard to get the right kind of balance. You just got to understand your list and understand the terrain. And where I did well, a lot of that was to do with how I used the terrain. But there you go, folks. There's a review of my list, a review of the games, and don't forget to check out the description below for the report on the event itself, where we talk about all the other aspects of the event. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll see you all on the next one.